This is Hope Incorporated Australia. We engage with citizens and communities to help achieve better, responsible environmental protection and stewardship, locally, nationally and globally. We work from and adjacent to the traditional lands of the Gayabal, Jadawa and Yugara peoples of southeast Queensland, and we acknowledge our deep respect for the inspiring, protective nature stewardship carried out by First Nations communities around the world for thousands of years. A warm welcome to Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures, a podcast from Hope Incorporated Australia. I'm your host, Andrew Nicholson. In this digital space, we want to reinvigorate the often overlooked power of public imagination and future visioning. Our own vision for this podcast project is to help grow a creative, values-driven community of imaginative, bigger picture thinkers, people who collaborate, share ideas, and help map plausible, credible pathways towards futures that will be climate safer, properly nature protected, socially more supportive, and economically fairer in the share out of resources, futures which will leave no one behind. Each episode will offer simple but energising future visioning exercises designed to spark your imagination and help you picture what a thriving, more inclusive and sustainable future could look like for you and your community. Because the future is not a fixed destination. It is being shaped every day by the decisions we make individually and collectively. Together we can choose to make different future development decisions that serve the many, not the few, and we can push harder for the major system-level changes needed to make those better futures real. Over time, we hope imaginative, citizen-generated, visionary thinking can help amplify public calls for a just transition toward flourishing future development and fuel the push for the major progressive reforms needed to get there. Our pilot episodes explore some of those future reform possibilities in education, in citizen involvement in development planning, and in environmental protection advocacy. If you like what you hear, we'll expand the series with more visionary topics and voices, and we'll keep inviting your ideas, your input, and your imagination to help shape our future direction. So, put on your imaginative future vision thinking caps and join me and my guests as we chart positive, credible pathways toward a flourishing 2040 and beyond. I look forward to your company.
I think it's time humans recognise we cannot live without nature. Storytelling is an important tool in the toolbox for engaging the next generation with the environment, and it always has been, it always will be. Every person can make a difference by telling tales.
Embedding nature connection and that ecological literacy into every level of education. It's from preschool to adult learning, hands-on, place-based experiences, getting outside, getting connected.
You may have heard the sayings, a picture is worth 1,000 words, or everyone loves a good story. These sayings show how powerful art can be in helping people understand important ideas, especially when it is combined with science. And when artists and scientists work together, they can help people see how important nature is for our health and the health of all living things. Such teamwork can also help inspire people to speak up and support stronger rules to protect nature. Art and science are both great at explaining things, but in different ways. Art uses feelings and imagination. Science uses facts and research. And when we put them together, they can help us see how humans and nature are connected, even in ways we don't always notice. Through painting, music, storytelling, film and more, art, science and nature storytelling can help us understand that we are part of nature, not separate from it. Such stories can help show us how nature supports our lives and how we've lived closely with the natural world for thousands of years. But these stories can also show us the hard truth, that in more recent times people have often hurt nature by taking too much from it and treating it like something to control or destroy or exploit. And if we keep living this way, the damage to our environment and the human well-being that depends upon it will almost certainly get worse. The good news is that through combining art, science and nature connectedness, we can imagine and perhaps start working toward new ways of living, ways that are better for people, animals, plants and the earth. Such visionary stories and ideas can help guide us toward fixing the damage, caring for the planet and living in a more balanced and respectful way with nature. So in this episode we're going to imagine possible future opportunities to strengthen that collaboration between art, science and nature connectedness. Could we increase the nature protective power of the storytelling such collaboration can provide? Could more powerful and widespread storytelling help us move closer by 2040 toward achieving a climate safer, properly nature protected, socially fairer and genuinely more prosperous future, a flourishing future which leaves no one behind? I'm joined by two great guests to help explore these future vision imaginative questions and others. Both are from southern Queensland, Australia. Jennifer WAITHMAN is coordinator of the Wide Bay BURNETT Environment Council, and Dr. Sarah Pye is a staff member at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And both guests have great experience in combining art and science in imaginative storytelling aimed at helping educate audiences on the importance of proper protection of nature. For Sarah, that has included writing children's books on the topic, and Jennifer has extensive experience in interpretive guiding for nature. So a warm welcome to you both folks, Sarah and Jennifer. It's great to have you on the podcast and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Let's start that conversation with a self-introduction from you both, and let's hear first from Sarah.
Thanks for that introduction, Andrew, and for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful project. I refer to myself as a conservation storyteller, and I've got 7 or almost 8 books to my name, but writing and storytelling hasn't always been my passion. I was born in a tiny English outpost of Gibraltar to 2 very adventurous parents, and I spent my early years sailing on the Norfolk Broads in the UK. My parents were both teachers, but they became disillusioned by the British school system. And when I was 13, we moved on to a 32-foot ketch. From that day, which incidentally was April 1st, 1979, I was boat schooled by the natural world and the cultures that we experienced as we travelled. Fast forward a few decades, several careers and a few continents later, my life completely changed on Boxing Day in 2012 as I stood on an observation platform in Borneo with Malaysian ecologist Dr. Wong Soo Tee, watching sun bears swinging in the trees 15 metres above me. I asked Wong how I could help him save this incredible species from extinction, and he came back with 5 very powerful words: do what you do best. Trying to determine what that was took me on a bit of a journey, and I connected Wong to the University of the Sunshine Coast, where I now teach sustainability and tourism. This led to numerous research projects, but it also turned out that the best way I could help sun bears was through narratives. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. You can find more about me or check out my books or even connect with me on socials by visiting my website, sarahrpye.com.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And just to say that we will have links, as we will with all episodes, to our guest's work, to Sarah's work in the show notes for this episode, along with some other possible resources which either guest may mention during the discussion. So thanks for that, Sarah. And now over to you, Jennifer. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here today. So really, my whole love and passion for the natural world started when I was really young. I grew up with my mom. She used to take me fishing and hiking and camping around the state of Oregon, where I'm from in the United States. And this spark really led me to follow a path and a career in the natural world, which wasn't, of course, my initial idea, but I had a great moment, and I wanted to take a moment to tell the story because it really was my light bulb changing moment. I was driving home late one night when I was in college, or university, as they say in Australia, and I came upon mama deer and her baby fawn in the middle of the road. And it was this big S-curve, and it was a back road, so people came really fast through there. And I got out, and everything looked fine. You know, I couldn't see anything physically wrong with the creature. And while I was looking, there was a car that came by and almost hit the fawn, and then, of course, almost caused a wreck for the car. And so I did something that maybe I know a bit more now about, but I did stop and I actually went and picked up the fawn and moved it off the road. The mom stayed nearby and I went down to report it to the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, the fawn did pass away, but it was my light bulb moment that made me go, I want to work in the natural world. And so that led me to a career in heritage interpretation. And I've worked for various governmental agencies in the United States and Australia. And I've been here now for 8 years, and I've worked Parks Victoria as well as some local LGAs. And I'm a big bird watcher, so I love connecting people to birds. And I'm now with Wide Bay Burnett Environment Council as well as Interpretation Australia, really trying to grow this profession in the country. And I'm a certified interpretive guide. I'm an interpretive trainer, which I have a big passion for training people in this skill set. And my journey has kind of led me to really building a strong skill set in that face-to-face guiding, as well as I love interpretive signage. So those signs you read outside on a trail or inside a visitor center. And I'm just really happy to be here to discuss what we're going to be talking about.
Folks, thanks for that great introduction. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to interview you both for the Imagining 2040 podcast series.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, happy to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get further into our conversation and build on that introductory background you've just given us by asking each of these linked questions to both of you. Can you tell us some more about how you developed your interest and energy for the work you do today in 2025, and also of any thoughts you have on your work going forward? You may be able to help us get onto some different future development paths by 2040, by which I mean paths more likely to take us toward the sort of flourishing futures we've already been pointing to. So first, let's hear from Sarah on that question.
I'm very passionate about connecting people to nature through narratives or stories, and I think we have to look back a bit to start. So storytelling is an ancient teaching tool, and I believe that modern humans have neglected it. I also think that narratives have an essential part to play in science communication now and into the future. So if I go back to that day when I actually met Dr. Wong Suti in Borneo, I asked Dr. Wong if I could tell his story in 2016. So when he enthusiastically agreed, I had to then learn how to do that. So the way I chose to do that was by enrolling in a Doctor of Creative Arts degree. And I spent 4 years researching how narratives can be used to engage non-scientists in conservation. Part of the output of my doctorate was Dr. Wong's biography, which is called Saving Sun Bears, and it illustrates how one person can make a difference when it comes to saving our environment. The other part was an exegesis, which explored topics like the disconnect between arts and science, anthropomorphism, the importance of hope in conservation, and the role of inductive storytelling to help make sense of deductive science. So in the process of writing this book, Saving Sun Bears, I became aware of a lack of environmental engagement between younger generations in the natural world. Since then, Wong and I have collaborated on creating 6 children's books about his adventures with different species. It's called the Wildlife Wong series, and it was shortlisted for an Australian Educational Publishing Award in 2020. Through this process, I've found my own environmental voice and focus, and I've just finished writing my next book, Curious Kai Asks Why, which is a blended fiction and non-fiction narrative telling the tale of a young girl on a quest to learn from Australian wildlife, where she meets real scientists that are studying them. I feel really strongly that the path to a more environmentally literate future is through education of the next generation. Narratives provide an accessible gateway to the natural world, which should be complemented by experiential learning. So to that end, I now deliver school workshops to kids using my narratives and puppetry to connect them to science and nature. So I guess I sort of use Dr. Jane Goodall's quote as my inspiration at the moment. She said, "Only if we understand will we care. Only if we care will we hope. Only if we help shall all be saved." That's sort of where I'm coming from for my current work.
Oh, thank you, sir. But what a fantastic overview of the power of storytelling, for nature protection purposes. And now let's hear from Jennifer on the same question about your work in 2025 and what contribution you think it might be able to make to help take us down a different development path toward a more flourishing future by 2040.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. And, I love what Sarah said, and it really kind of connects to me because, as I said, I grew up outside, and my path started with that wonder of the natural world, not just the big, beautiful landscapes, but also the adorable, cute creatures with their beautiful flower. It doesn't have to be the cute and cuddly. It can be amazing plants as well, and just the diversity that we have on our planet. And so that really, as I said, led me into realizing I wanted to work in the environmental field in some way. And I thought I wanted to do research, but then I was introduced to what I call interpretation or heritage interpretation. And I just want to quickly do a small definition of what that kind of is. And really what all we're talking about is a communication-based process that connects an audience to a resource that builds emotional and intellectual connections. So we're not just talking about facts in our brain, we're talking about our heart, right? When we start to care. And so that led me to, working at national parks and wildlife refuges, as well as local conservation areas. And really, it's just been to help people see, right? To connect to stories, as Sarah was talking about, these stories, connecting to the systems around us, the beauty of the natural world, not just the facts, having that information, but connecting within our heart, within our emotions. And that's really what it's about, sparking that relationship between people and place. And now in our world today, I think that's more important than ever. Interpretation really blends that storytelling, that sensory exploration, cultural knowledge, artists, right? We can collaborate with artists, scientists, and our cultural knowledge keepers, and create these amazing immersive visitor experiences, whether it's walks and trails or inside a center, or maybe it's virtual reality. And again, it's not just about the facts, it's about that connection that we feel. And so I believe this sort of work going forward is really important to shifting our development path and our mindset toward a more, flourishing and sustainable future. And really, when nature interpretation is done well, it has an amazing ability to create that shift. Some people may bring up behavior change sort of theory. We're not going to dive into that, but that's sort of that deeper shift in how people relate to the world and think and their behaviors and what they do to support that. And so I think that, it really reminds us we're part of something bigger and something connected. It's all tied together. And our communities are tied together with the health of our planet, our culture, even our economies, if we really want to go that far. It really does. So I think that work really cultivates the kind of ecological citizenship. And that's what I really hope to see moving forward, is that interconnectedness in everything that we do in our lives.
Well, again, Jennifer, thank you. I just think, again, that's a marvelous sort of, intro into an set of insights into this idea of nature connectedness. Within the title of the episode, we're looking at the connectivity between art, science, and nature connectedness. And that's a fantastic overview, again, tapping into the awe, the thrill of being connected to nature, the heart as well as the head, not just thinking about it, but also feeling it as well. So great. Now, let's move on, folks. Let's move into the heart of the episode, the imaginative core. This is the part where we get to think beyond the business as usual future that we know, the failing future, some might say, which seems to be taking us likely towards a very difficult time if we keep on doing what we've always done. Instead, I want you to imagine a different kind of future, a better, more progressive and hopeful future that we've already started to point to in outline from both your comments. I talked about this contrast in greater detail in the series introduction episode. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, folks out there in podcast land, please listen to that. I recommend checking it out. But right now, I want to ask you, my dear guests, to do something a little out of the box. I want you to imagine it's the year 2040, 15 years from now, and we don't have a crystal ball to envisage it, but we do have something powerful that often gets overlooked, our imaginations. So here's the task. I want you to picture that thanks to some kind of sci-fi time travel device, and perhaps we'll work in some sound effects here as we go along. You've just landed in the year 2040, but it's not just any future time. This one is flourishing, and you know that because you can see and sense it is climate safer, fairer, greener, and more genuinely prosperous. It's a future where no one is being left behind. And in the imaginary 15 years or so between 2040 and now, you can see that a lot has obviously changed. Big progressive reforms have actually occurred, reforms that have made a measurable difference to reducing and adapting to climate disruption. Reforms, for instance, that have greatly increased protected natural areas and tree cover. Reforms that have ensured affordable housing and excellent universal basic service provision for all. They've all been put in place. And now, while you're there in that better, more flourishing, thriving future, imagine you've written a personal report. And in that report, you've captured all the inspiring things you saw, the progress, the innovation, the increased well-being all around, the overall better quality of life for humans and more than humans. And then, and here's the imaginary bit, you've travelled back to today to share that report with us. So, folks, please give us a bit of a summary of that report. What did you experience in that more flourishing 2040 time, that well-being centred future world? What did you see, hear and experience? Give us an impression, and Sarah, we'll start with you.
You are not going to believe what I experienced in 2035. It was absolutely incredible, and it gave me such hope that we can not only save our own species from extinction, but we can actually live in harmony with the natural world. So apparently, when I got to 2035, they told me that it all started in 2030 when GDP was replaced globally as the overriding measurement of a country's success by the Earth Charter's measurement of planetary well-being. Now, gradually, Western cultures shifted from a focus on endless growth to one where humans in 2035 live within our planetary sustainable boundaries. And half of the Sustainable Development Goals are already met. The climate's even stabilized and may even start repairing pretty soon. This has all happened due to all sorts of things, but two that I found really extraordinary. One was the technological and biological advances, which have helped clean the oceans of plastic. They've produced clean energy from every available surface on Earth and transformed travel so that it's no longer such a huge negative to the environment. But the most important thing that I found was the cultural shift and the reconnect with nature, which was the most impressive thing in 2035. Sentient beings and even some trees have rights equal to humans. They're now recognized as integral jigsaw pieces in the web of life, and their needs have been elevated in political decisions, resulting in no new extinctions in Australia since 2030. The reintegration of humans as a positive part of their habitat is nothing less than extraordinary in 2035. Children are aware of their place in nature from the moment they take their first steps and speak their first words, because narrative storytelling has taken pride of place in early education. For instance, in primary schools, youngsters are no longer imprisoned in classrooms for 6 hours a day or anchored to desks. At least half of their lessons are conducted outdoors, and they're supported by the elders of each community who share their lived wisdom. This has resulted in engaged citizenship for both youngsters and old people, and deeper connection to our planet. This has also changed the curriculum. The curriculum is fluid and it's no longer siloed into disciplines, supporting children to find their passion, and this idea of cross-disciplinary education has just become impressive. And when people even leave school, there's a guaranteed living wage, which gives them freedom to embrace their true potential without counting the hours to the weekend or being afraid of poverty. The overriding outcome in 2035 is a happier planet for all living things. And guess what? People smile more, they care more, and they're connected to country.
Oh, thanks for that, Sarah. A really exciting imaginary vision of possible, plausible, but different and better ways of doing childhood education in support of increasing nature connectedness, encouraging children perhaps to become the more conscientious nature stewards of the future. That would be a major contribution to the human-nature relationship, improving the human-nature relationship generally. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. It was really a fun thing to do.
Well, brilliant. We need more imagination, You see, this is it, isn't it? We need it in every single sector, including podcasting. So, okay, Jennifer, let's hear your imaginative contribution. What are your general impressions from your Imagine 2040 report?
Yes, I stepped back 5 more years into 2040, and it felt like walking into a world where something fundamental had shifted. Just in the spirit that you felt. You could feel it in the way people walked through spaces, slower, more connected to what was around them. You could hear it in their conversations, that tone of care and curiosity and a shared purpose. So, nature had been welcomed back into everyday life. Cities weren't just greened as a token need to, they were alive. They were central, woven into the way people moved and gathered and even governed. In the neighborhoods, there was places called nature hubs, and they were learning centers and community kitchens and gardens and sanctuaries. It was, a lot of different things for all people of all ages, where they would come together to share their knowledge, the stories, food. Kids played in the dirt while the elders were telling stories. Art was integrated everywhere with murals and, crafting wind chimes that sang in the wind and public sculptures that tracked a change of seasons. They weren't just aware of nature. They were in a relationship with it. And so, back in 2025, a lot of our work was about reconnecting people to nature, helping them see it again. But in 2040, that connection was part of life. It was just in the language children used to describe a bird and the policy shaped by ecological indicators, as seriously as our economic ones that we focus so much more on in 2025. And really, what surprised me the most was how central that interpretation and storytelling had become to building this world. In 2025, it was often described as environmental education or ecotourism or these sort of terms. And really had been elevated to a core part of civic life. They were everywhere. They're embedded in the school system, as Sarah mentioned. They're in hospitals even, local councils. I met one who was working in a mental health clinic using nature walks to help patients process trauma. And there was another was developing virtual reality forest experiences for communities unable to access green space physically. So it was just really there. And the technologies, when they were being used, they weren't flashy for the sake of it. There was purpose to using it. Smart trails that changed lighting and soundscapes based on wildlife movement. And AI tools that helped communities map local ecosystem changes and link them to cultural memory. So really all of that wraps up to one thing. What changed? It was the mindset. There wasn't a sense of humans versus nature. That division had dissolved, We were together. We were belonging with each other. There was one moment that summed it up for me. I was walking along a community trail and I came across a group of teenagers giving a nature tour to tourists. And they weren't just listing facts about the birds or the trees or what they were seeing. They were telling stories about their grandparents planting the trees, and they were sharing poetry. They were laughing, and they were proud. And that's what it is. It's not, perfection. It's participation. It's care. It's wonder, and it's community.
Again, a brilliant, energizing picture of a different, more flourishing futures, nature-connected futures. It just, to me, again points to why we need to have these more imaginative conversations. They need to be across the board. Why aren't we hearing this sort of uplifting, imaginary sort of discussion of possibilities that could be brought into effect? I mean, this is the thing. It's not just pie in the sky. We could achieve all of this, but we don't get the initial story, seems to me, to start, drawing out the track of what we could follow. But anyway, both you folks, Sarah and Jennifer, thank you so much for that imaginative time travel journey, not so much back to the future rather than back from the future. Now, I just want to do a quick debrief here to make sure we're all back in 2025 and not suffering too badly from any time jump effects, so because we could feel a bit, strung out. So, folks, what year is this? Come on, just get into the spirit here.
2025.
I've got a little bit of seasickness, but I'm okay.
Okay, that's great. So it's good to know we're back here in 2025. And let's, again, draw on another imaginative approach to thinking about stuff in a more visionary and imaginative way. So staying in the present moment here in 2025, another way we can use imagination to explore possible, plausible future opportunities to achieve flourishing futures is by looking closely at what's already happening now. And when we look around us, we can often discover inspiring new initiatives, case studies, proofs of concept, bold ideas, genuinely bold ideas, which, if taken forward, promoted and implemented, could lead to far better development outcomes. So such opportunities can be considered as early signs or signals of possible futures. They could be considered whispers of change or pointers to the kind of future we'd actually like to see more of over the next 10, 15 or 20 years and beyond. Whilst not necessarily acting as predictions, they can suggest possible beneficial shifts in the current development paths we're on. So one question here becomes, what if we could identify and amplify these signals more often? What if these signals, these opportunities, the most promising, progressive, future-facing ideas and initiatives were supported more, were strengthened and multiplied? Could such signal strengthening help shift us more rapidly onto development paths toward the sorts of more thriving, life-enhancing and flourishing futures you've both started to outline for 2040 and beyond? So the question for you both folks is, are you seeing any early signals of the future which could lead us toward more flourishing development paths by 2040? And let's start again with Sarah.
I would say absolutely. There are definite signals that we can actually potentially reach that future that we saw in our imaginations there. And I think before outlining them, I think it's important to identify that we're living in a time in 2025 with community where eco-grief is insipid. And I'd like to suggest that people look at a book by Leslie Head called Hope and Grief in the Anthropocene, a beautiful book. And what she did in her research was she identified the importance of having hope. If we're to save the planet, we have to have hope. So we have tremendous challenges ahead, but we also have reasons for optimism and hope. We need that hope if we're to save our planet. So acknowledging the positive steps is not positive greenwashing, which some people think it is. It's actually an imperative way of looking at the world if we're going to cause change. So the three signals that give me hope is, one is experiential education, which is being integrated into educational options across the board, from state schools to private schools to alternative type of arrangements. For instance, homeschooling. The ABC reports that homeschooling registrations have more than doubled in the last 4 years. And there's organisations like the Wilding Forest School in Brisbane running programs for all ages of children, plus parents and educators. These are programs that harness the extraordinary power of nature and inspire wonder and ignite imagination, which is obviously what we've been talking about today. So that's one of those signals for me. Another signal for me is that 6 countries currently give rights to nature, including New Zealand, where the Wanganui River, I'm pretty sure I managed to mess up that pronunciation, but there we go, was granted legal personhood recently, and in Ecuador, where all nature has the legally protected right to exist, persist, and regenerate. So when we're actually caring about nature as if we care for our own species, then I think we can potentially get to that future. The third thing I'm finding is a real signal for me is the idea that we're starting to discuss this idea of alternative measurements of success, and they're sprouting up everywhere. Things like the Earth Charter Index, which is designed to measure the contributions of countries to planetary well-being. It also recognises that GDP is an inadequate measure of progress. There's other measures that are being considered, like the UN's Human Development Index or the New Economics Foundation's Happy Planet Index. And these are all attempting to shift the conversation from endless growth to other measurements which are more inclusive of our entire environment. So that's a real signal to me that we're moving forward in the right direction.
Thanks for that. What an excellent smorgasbord of positive initiatives that are happening in the here and now. Again, we don't hear enough about those type of initiatives. I wonder why that is. And that's a whole podcast episode in itself. But, just picking out one of those ideas that you started with there, Sarah, hope. One interpretation that might be made there, this concept of radical hope, the preparedness to take action, get on with it, take action, even if the final objective or outcome is not guaranteed. But using that sort of approach, that sort of aspect of hope, that species of hope, if you like, as an antidote to despair, apathy, cynicism, and learned helplessness, getting on with a task, an objective in a positive, optimistic way. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
And I think that's where narratives play such an important role, Andrew, where narratives have the ability to engage people to hope. And interpret the science that we have in a hopeful way.
Yeah, good point, Sarah. Jennifer, you had something to say? I think you were...
Well, it goes right into my sort of look and possible future signals, but I wanted to focus really quick on this hope, right? This word hope. And in the field of interpretation, we have something called universal concepts. And universal concepts is something that anybody from any background, anywhere in the world can relate to. And I think hope is one of those words. It's a powerful word. Also things just like love and family, these core central ideas that all of us have some sort of relationship with. And so hope is very important. And these universal concepts to connect people, whether it's through the narratives and storytelling with an interpretation or whatever format you're using, are super powerful and something that we really need to be aware of and, really use in a connected way to encourage this, relevance to people from all over the world.
Yeah, very true.
Couldn't agree more. And I mean, there's a whole, again, another podcast episode on wisdom traditions. You see globally for thousands of years back, those kind of qualities, the better qualities of human nature, compassion, wisdom, curiosity, stuff like this. They've always been there. It's just that they're not getting enough emphasis, perhaps, and again, as the reasons for that, there's another discussion entirely. But yeah, I could not agree more. Fantastic. So let's hear now, Jennifer, just extend on that in terms of your possible future signals. You started to sort of point to that, but give us more detail.
Yes. So I think, some of the work that I see, and I would do a lot more on the ground sort of work and that face-to-face sort of programming idea. And I think, one thing within conservation is that community-based restoration projects that you see. There are a lot of grassroots efforts out there in multiple regions, from urban youth to retirees. They come together to restore native habitats, create wildlife corridors, regenerate our local ecosystems. And really what's powerful about this is they're not just about that environmental health, but they're also building social capital, right? They're fostering deeper community ties and revitalizing local economies through possibly ecotourism, empowering the citizens, the community to take, a bit of that ownership and care. Really, it's that care for country and the care of their surroundings and that, environment and ecosystem. And also, I think another thing, and, I saw this in 2040, is that is integrated into nature-based mental health programs, right? We see a little bit here and there of nature journaling, but there's more and more communities implementing nature walks and forest therapy and just that outdoor mindfulness sessions, which nature journaling is an example of that. And these all improve mental and emotional well-being. And the programs really recognize that the healing power of nature is profound. We need to be connected to Earth. And as we heal ourselves, we also can heal the earth, right? We can do this together, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I think there's enough research out there that shows the connections, right? With blue zones and longevity in life and what those sort of people do to live longer, and how they're really a lot more connected than people living, let's say, our urban population in the cities. So I think, some of these initiatives we've both talked about, they need more support, right? Funding support, policy, public awareness, all of this. And I believe if we can amplify their impact and make them foundations of a healthier and future, they embody that kind of systems thinking that connects people with nature, with each other, and that broader ecological health of our planet and all of us with it.
Thank you, folks. Some great ideas and reflections in that last talking point segment. You've helped strengthen the idea of signals of the future. Just to make that point, there are loads of innovative opportunities which already exist. They're on the ground, they're functioning now, which could help take us along better development paths into more flourishing futures by 2040 and beyond. Again, we don't hear enough about them, so it's great that you are pointing them out. Perhaps we just need to search for those signals, those opportunities more carefully and particularly imaginatively, support their growth and spread with far greater determination, as you pointed to there, Jennifer, just before. And we're going to put resource links to some of those signals in the introductory episode show notes. But now, look, as we move toward the final part of today's wonderful conversation, I want to shift the time gears one last time and bring us back to that energizing vision of a preferable, flourishing 2040 future that you've started to outline so well. I want to help reinforce that preferable future vision idea because, sadly, in our business as usual world of 2025, we know there are countless reasons that are always put forward to explain why visionary and progressive ideas or initiatives cannot go ahead. Such allegedly realistic and can't do advice comes in a wide spectrum of rejection. And again, I've talked more about that issue in the introductory episode of the series. But in response to can't do, this podcast series is aimed at engaging far greater numbers of the public with the ideas of can do, plausible future development pathways and genuinely bold visions that could help us create better life-enhancing futures. Ideally, we want our listeners to become Imagineers. That is, imaginative and visionary thinkers who over time strengthen and direct the power of their personal and collective imaginations to develop their own visions of preferable futures, to build citizen-led imaginative power to help break through the knee-jerk negativity and roadblocks created by business-as-usual developmental mindsets. So, in light of that ringing endorsement of imaginative thinking, let's now come to our last imaginative future vision exercise and associated question to round off this brilliant, stimulating discussion. So, folks, imagine that you wake up tomorrow and you just know that, along with many other like-minded people, Imagineers like yourselves, you have your collaborative hands on the levers of great power, power which enables you and others to bring about wise and well-considered major changes and reforms to benefit our communities, beneficial reforms which cannot be blocked by business-as-usual pushback. So the question becomes, in that imaginary situation, can you describe up to 3 actions you would take starting tomorrow that would make it more likely that we could get onto better development paths by 2040, paths towards flourishing futures in the decades ahead? Sarah, let's go again with you first.
Okay. I think if I had the power to make these things happen, I would support those seeds and signals that are already growing. That would happen through funding, through promotion, through integration, through our entire a way of being, I guess. So if we're going to be more specific, the first thing I would do on this day when I had power to make change would be to replace GDP as a measurement of success. We would choose something more holistic, something that actually measures well-being and not just economic growth. It's a short-sighted, blinkered focus, which is the cause of such environmental suffering and degradation. And how can we possibly learn to live in harmony with natural systems if the only KDP we use is flawed? We cannot survive this planet on the assumption of endless growth, and discovered by as was discovered by the people on Easter Island. And all you have to do is to have a look at some interesting cases of that. So I suggest reading the work of Jared Diamond on Easter Island. Might give you some ideas on that one. The second thing I would do is I would free education from the classroom. I would get kids outdoors. I would make sure at least half of their time was spent outdoors learning from the environment. And I would also make education free to absolutely everyone. And I mean real free, not pretend free, which we tend to get in a lot of Western cultures. Our education models are outdated. Apart from a few integrated technologies, mainstream methods haven't really changed since the introduction of compulsory education. And we need to integrate the people who have knowledge base. We need to integrate them into the classroom and take the classroom outside. The third thing I would do is I would give sentient beings rights under law in every single jurisdiction of the world, ensuring the non-human is considered in policy making as we shift our thinking from a deontological framework where humans are paramount to one where we appreciate every single living thing on Earth, and it becomes an important part of every decision that we make.
Behind you is a slide in the visual stuff we're doing here of a sun bear, I think it is, looking out from behind a tree, obviously looking to you as the advocate, as the powerful advocate for nature stewardship that you are, amongst many other things. And just one other point I take out of your segment there, the history of GDP. I mean, the fact that it still has such a stranglehold, gross domestic product as a measure of progress, that it still has such a stranglehold on orthodox economic thinking. There are many other ways now, of course, of thinking economically, but again, they just don't get the publicity. I think I'm going to put in a link to the history of GDP because it's a story well worth understanding of how we got to the point where it's still, unfortunately, conditioning most of standard economic thought. Okay, yes. Thank you again for that, Sarah. Now let's hear what Jennifer might do if she had her collaborative hands on the levers of power. Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. Well, funny thing, my first one is very in line with one of Sarah's. It is really, embedding nature connection and ecological literacy into every level of education, right? Sarah's talked about this here and there, but it's from preschool to adult learning, hands-on, place-based experiences, getting outside, getting connected. Unfortunately, you see a lot of those sort of programs get cut from budgets in 2025, and that's been an ongoing, honestly, issue for a while. And I think that's something we need to change, and it can be changed. And that's really important to start building this connectedness to our environment world is starting from that young age. It's so important. The next thing I would do is create permanent funding in streams for community-led nature projects, whether it's garden trails and storytelling spaces, so Sarah could come tell us a story in it. And, so people can shape their own relationship with the land. We need the community to buy into where they're living and their place within the community, their place within the environment, their place with nature. And then also I'd elevate the roles of interpreters, of artists, because they're doing their own type of interpretation. Cultural, people in policy making, they need to listen. They not just listen, they need to just kind of be open to understanding and being introduced to this world, recognizing that how we feel about the future shapes what we do to build it. And so I think those 3 steps, we would slowly start to shift our hearts, our systems, and our landscapes together for that better future.
Oh, absolutely. Well done. That sums it up well.
It certainly does sum it up well there, Jennifer. Resourcing, one of the things I took from that, again, a smorgasbord of ideas, very positive, energizing ideas. Resourcing for the arts, and I throw in science. We need much more resourcing, massive boost to that. Especially here in Australia, allegedly the clever country. Well, how clever is it that we've underfunded the arts and the sciences for so long? But anyway, again, that's another podcast episode, imaginative podcast episode.
Yes, we could talk for, I'm sure, a long time on that right there.
Exactly. Well, look, folks, great stuff. Once again, so energising and uplifting to hear imagination used in this way. Again, I think, this is the whole idea of the podcast series. Let's just demonstrate how imagination can, if nothing else, lift up the spirits when one thinks about possibilities as opposed to all the things that one cannot do. Imagination which helps point us toward possible actions which could help us achieve better, more flourishing, could do and can do futures. So now for the absolute last question for you two. You've actually given us a barnstorm here of ideas, but in this great, wonderful episode, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience? Perhaps a pithy comment which helps summarise your core ideas in the episode, or perhaps a suggestion for how listeners could get more deeply involved with some of the ideas you have been discussing today. Whatever you want to say in closing, folks. Let's go with, just to shake this up a bit, let's go with Jennifer first.
Oh, I was going to end it with how Sarah started it, with a quote, and a quote that actually is very similar to hers, which I think actually speaks then just for itself, how both of us chose something. And it's usually attributed to Freeman Tilden, who is sometimes considered the godfather of heritage interpretation, but actually it was originally written by an anonymous United States National Park Service ranger. And Tilden later quoted this in his influential book, Interpreting Our Heritage, from 1957. And this really helped shape the philosophy of interpretation today in parks and conservation. And so this quote is, "Through interpretation, understanding. Through understanding, appreciation. Through appreciation, protection." And that's what I want to leave everyone with today.
Excellent, excellent. Sarah, do you want to add to that, or?
Absolutely, I would love to. I think it's time humans recognise we cannot live without nature. Storytelling is an important tool in the toolbox for engaging the next generation with the environment, and it always has been, it always will be. Every person can make a difference by telling tales.
What an inspiring closure from our guests, both of them, to round off this great discussion on some possibilities for moving onto better development paths toward more flourishing futures by 2040 and beyond. We've been focusing particularly on that fantastic intersection between art, science and nature connectedness, but I think some of the ideas that have been coming forth, could apply to other sectors as well. But thank you so much. Thank the both of you so much for your great thought-provoking contributions.
Thank you, Andrew.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So that wraps up this episode, folks, but Sarah and Jennifer will be back shortly in a bonus extension to this recording, talking more spontaneously and covering any questions they think I missed in this recording, so listen out for that. And just going back to this episode one last time, one key idea that I'm going to take away from it is that comment that Sarah made about humans needing to recognise that we cannot live without nature, and that stories are an important way to engage the next generation with the environmental challenges we're facing, and that everyone can make a difference by telling tales, by telling stories. Well, I certainly think that my two excellent guests today have told some imaginative and inspiring tales in this episode. At the end of each episode, I wonder what you, our listeners, our community of increasingly future literate, imaginative future thinkers, will take away from this episode and our energising journey into visualising possible pathways to better futures by 2040. We would like you to be part of this podcasting experiment in future vision imagination, and to help us try to answer a question. Could a podcast series like this help with sparking the shift, the transition we so urgently need toward better, climate safer, properly nature protected, socially and economically fairer future development pathways? Only time will tell if we can answer this question, tied to the podcast's ambitious deeper purpose. In the meantime, we hope you will continue the conversation sparked by this episode in your homes, workplaces, communities, organisations, and anywhere ideas are shared. Perhaps you may be inspired to answer your own future vision questions, such as, what could a more desirable, flourishing future in 2040 look like for me and for those around me? Or, how might the imaginative tools used in each episode, 2040 time travel, signals of the future, and taking 3 powerful actions, help me reflect, frame, and communicate my hopes for a better tomorrow? If you're enjoying the series, please consider sharing it, and word of mouth remains one of the most powerful ways to grow a podcast audience, and perhaps an online community committed to cultivating flourishing futures. We'd also love to hear from you. What ideas or questions stood out? What resonated or challenged you? You can send us your reflections, comments or questions by email, social media, text or voice message. You'll find contact details via the Hope Incorporated Australia's website and in the episode show notes. We also welcome your suggestions for possible future guests, topics or ways we might improve the format of the series. We see this podcast as a collaborative project, and your input could help shape what comes next. So until the next episode, keep your imaginations active and alive, keep wearing your 2040 Flourishing Futures hats, and please keep sharing ideas about how, individually and together in visionary community, we can use the power of imagination to shift our development pathways toward a truly flourishing 2040 and beyond. My name is Andrew Nicholson, and thanks so much for listening. Just a bit of extra bonus content for the Imagining 2040 episode on a stronger combined role for art, science and nature connectedness storytelling. Jennifer and Sarah just give us a bit of an extra emphasis on some of the content that we raised in the main episode body.
One of the things I want to briefly mention that I didn't in the official episode was just the opportunity to get involved in the community. We're talking about community projects and restoration or maybe nature walks. There's quite a few organizations. I suggest listeners to just do a little Google search depending where you are. There's in Queensland where I live, there's 9 different conservation councils that do different work depending where you live and always have lots of different engaging, activities to be involved in or advocacy on a local issue. There's also, wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland at least, and there's different groups all over. There could be regional koala groups, birding groups. Let's not forget about the plants, but get out, do a search and see how you can be involved and get onto, country, get into the landscape and in your community and have those connected experiences that we were talking about. And I would really encourage anyone to do that. And, even if you haven't done something before, do a nature walk. There's plenty of options for something simple. Start slow and get involved and get out there. Get out.
I reckon we hijack this a well-known phrase and ask not what your environment can do for you, but what you can do for your environment. So get out there and do something. It's all fine talking about this stuff, but we do need to put our money where our mouth is and actually get out there and do something.
Yeah, it seems to me, just riffing off what you said there, you're pointing to the gold standard of nature connectedness, to go back to the episode title, there is no substitute. Although some people might discuss that in terms of, or debate with that in terms of the virtual world that we've now got. But I personally believe there's no substitute for getting out there and connecting with the trees, the plants, the animals, the birds, etc. That is the obvious direct way to do it. And as you say, Jennifer, there are often plenty of opportunities. Even people walking through their local parks and green spaces, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be out in a wilderness area or, a national park. It can be your city park. It could be a botanic garden. It can be your backyard even. It's amazing what some people can see from their backyard. Even a city skyscraper can have a peregrine falcon nesting on it. And, you have backyard birds and it's easy to stop also and see the small things. Yeah. There's small things, there's butterflies and caterpillars and other little bugs, it might scare some people, but they're not scary. They have a purpose, they're actually pretty amazing. Let me just tell you, I don't like spiders. I've never liked spiders. Moving to Australia, I had to really work on my fear of spiders with big huntsmans and other things. And now I still get scared of huntsmans, but we have these amazing little garden jumping spiders and also crab spiders and these jeweled spiders in Queensland are just beautiful. And I now will rescue them and put them outside because they're pretty fascinating when you get into it. So even those little things can be fascinating. It's all in your backyard.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's one of the reasons that in my next book, Curious Kai Asks Why, my protagonist goes around Queensland meeting scientists and species, but they're not the iconic ones that we're used to. They're not the koalas. One of the species that she actually learns a lot from is a praying mantis, and we can find those in our backyard. We can, everyone can connect with nature. It doesn't matter if you live in a high rise in the middle of the city. You can connect with nature at some level. And I think it's imperative that we do so. But it's also really important, I think, one of the connection points that we have, Jen, is this idea of interpretation, right? Because it's not just looking at that nature. It's sort of having someone who connects you to it. Now, I try and do that through narratives and using a protagonist to be that interpreter of nature, and you do it in different ways too. So we have some similarities there. And I've got a question for you.
All right.
About one of the things that I studied when I did my doctorate and was the idea of an author being an interpreter of science and nature. But another thing that I also found was the idea of anthropomorphism and how we tend to sort of use anthropomorphism to connect people to nature. That comes with it's problematic, right? It's problematic. So how do you deal with the anthropomorphism of nature?
All right, that's the proverbial can of worms, Sarah, that you just opened. Because you will hear all different answers to asking that to people. And I grew up in a time where that was really big with Disney movies, right? I'm a quite person of that era. And so I see both sides. I see the side of trying to find how do you connect people to these creatures, right? And there is still some sort of side, and some research shows, right? Advanced, like dolphins, and people have interactions, right, where they're social, and we know, they do have some level of intelligence and pretty high intelligence, and certain birds are very intelligent as well. And so we do know that there is, I would say, some similarities, right, in some ways to people and creatures. So, but can we put everything that humans do and how we feel and how we spit onto those animals? No. Is there?
No, that's become problematic, doesn't it? Because we start relating to creatures as if they're humans, right? And I've tried really, really hard in all my books to try and come from the voice of the animal, to give that animal its own perspective and not actually lose that animal in the shuffle of anthropomorphism. And I think that can happen so quickly when we use, for instance, you talked about interpretive signage, we tend to quite often use anthropomorphism in signage. And is that something we need to try and avoid if we're to reach these futures that we've envisioned?
I would say, again, yes.
Yeah.
But no, right? But no, because
how do we do that?
Well, that's a great question. How do we do it? And I think that's where that being integrated in your environment, in the ecosystems with plants, animals, and having some knowledge and respect, right? Even for how all this works and that it is interconnected. I think people would build that sort of sense within themselves, their own relevance and their own connection of that. It isn't, I'm not forcing myself on them. They do, though, have their ways and they do.
You're right there, aren't you? It's knowledge. If we build that knowledge, we don't need to rely on the anthropomorphism. We can actually rely on the knowledge, right? So then that leads us to the other connection point that we've got between us is our understanding that education is the future, really, and knowledge, learning, and growing is the future.
Yeah, it's the building, it's the connectedness, and education. And I'm going to say this is yes. We use that term as a catch-all. Within interpretation, a lot of people that are interpreters are also environmental educators, but then we use a lot of same techniques, right? And we do very similar things. That goal and that outcome is slightly different, where with education, we really want them to learn, right? That intellectual, those facts, we're trying to test them on something, where that interp side is really trying to connect to the heart and building that connection and that sense of place and that relevance and those sort of concepts, where we usually do those things though hand in hand.
We do, but maybe we need to change that balance a bit, less from your idea of education to interp, so that schooling and the idea of education becomes more about interp.
Yeah, because you still are learning, and you will remember things, you will remember facts, because you feel some sort of a connection, right? You're feeling something to whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's an animal or a plant or a volcano, or a geologic landscape. It can be any of those things, or even a past creature, right? In paleontology, it's if you start building, right, we're talking about stories, you start building those connections and those stories, you will remember the facts and the knowledge that goes along with it. And so they are intertwined.
Yes, and that's why storytelling has been so powerful for eons.
What do you...
Well, I wanted to say, I'm a parent, and so I have a child that is growing up outside, and I can see the difference in what that has done for him and his knowledge, his interest. I mean, he'd rather be outside digging in a pile of dirt than in front of the TV. But that's been because his parents are both people that spend time outside. Building that into the schools, and I think that's where it begins, right? If we want to see that shift moving forward, we got to start with the youth that need to grow up learning and engaging in that mindset. And actually those kids will then take their parents on that journey as well. And that often happens. And I think really that is such a key, that we build more of that environmental stewardship and knowledge and that interconnectedness with place into our youth and our education system. And whether that, in the school, outside the school, all of it.
Yes. Yeah, it's really valuable to do that. And I think we're both trying to do that. We're doing our own little bit.
And folks, I just think, let's round off the discussion. I think you're doing more than your little bit. I mean, what a fantastic set of ideas you've presented. Let's keep the conversation going around the education of young people, frankly, also the education of adults. The dominant stories that are helping run our world at the moment are clearly not fit for purpose. Thank you so much to you, my two brilliant guests. I'm going to end this extra conversation now and see you on the other side, as it were. Hope Incorporated Australia, providing podcasts, research and community educational outreach to help achieve our vision of a society which is sustainable and just, ecologically, socially and economically. For more details on our work, please visit our website at www.hopeaustralia.org.au.